This is Gemara Metziah Daf Mem Ches, and we're holding on the bottom of Mem Zayin Amid Beis, just a scheduling detail. We hope, Mirz Hashem, we're going to try to start getting up the Pesach Shiurim a little bit early. Hopefully, we'll be putting up 2 a day this week so that everyone could prepare adequately. So we're holding on the bottom of Mem Zayin Amid Beis, and we're in the middle of the Machlekes Rav Shlokish versus Rav Yochanan. What is a kinyan mid'oraisa? Rav Yochanan says cash. Reish Lakish says even Mashicha is kaina. Oh, I should say even Mashicha, but Mashicha is kaina mid'oraisa. Asks the Gemara on Reish Lakish Tinan, 3 lines from the bottom, a kasha from our original Mishnah. Tinan. Taught the Mishnah that if someone, after paying money, backs out of a sale, we said that he gets a mishabara, he gets cursed. So says the Gemara articulates the obvious kasha. If giving cash is a good kinyan, then it makes sense that giving money is a full-fledged kinyan, so you get a curse if you backed out. What's the curse for? There was no kinyan. Answers the Gemara. You know where the curse comes from? Mishum Devarim. Devarim mikai ba'avel? Says the Gemara. But are words enough of a violation to create such a curse? Vatanya, but we learned in our Braisa. As we move over to Mem Ches Amid Aleph, Rabbi Shimon Aimer teaches Rav Shimon, Avali Shamru, Talis, Kainer Dinar Zav, in Dinar Zav, Kainer Talis. Teaches Rav Shimon, a Mashiach and a Talis obligates one to pay the Dinar Zav, but a Mashiach on the Dinar Zav does not obligate one to give the Talis. But yet, says Rav Shimon, Mikal Makayim, 3 lines down, Kach halacha, such is the halacha. Avol, Amru Mishabar Miachidar Amabu Miachidar Aflaga, Umiachi Sidoim Va'amayra. He who paid back Kadosh Baruch Hu, the flood, the dispersion, Sidoim Amayra Umitzrayim Biyam. Who was Para Mishain Haimed B'diburai? He who does not stand by his words. V'hanoise v'noisin b'dvarim. Continues the brayso. If someone buys and sells with words, I give my word and that's how I make the kinyan. Like Kana. V'achayzer boy. And if someone backs out, Ein ruach hachamim neichaimenu. Chazal are not happy with him. Ve'omar Rava. And on this brayso explains Rava. We have nothing more than one who Chazal were not happy with. So what do we see? We see that the Brayso articulates so clearly that if someone is not oimid b'diburai, what happens? It's what? Does he get a curse? Does it seem that way? It seems that all he gets is that Chazal aren't so happy. We're not saying that it's great, but it's not the same level as a curse. Says the Gemara, 12 lines down, Dvarim v'ika b'aydayu mois, koi ba'avol. Dvarim v'leka b'aydayu mois, loika ba'avol. So says the Gemara, in our Mishnah, we had 2 things together. There were Dvarim, and as well on top of Dvarim, there was what? Mois. Because the Maisa, there was money given. So when the 2 converge, then you get a curse. If it was merely a verbal agreement, then it's not a curse. It's just Chazal are not happy with you. So if one is listening, we see that there's really 3 levels. There's a full-fledged kinyan. There's something that's not a kinyan, but you get this dreadful mishabara curse. God's going to smite you. And then there's a 3rd level, backing out of one's word, even though there was no kinyan, there was no money. That also is a level of ein ruach hachamim noicha heimenu. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, 15 lines down. The first one in the line is Amar Rava. Let's bring a raya to Reish Lakish. Krau masnita. Both the pasuk and the brayso the right to Reish Lakish that the kinyan midaraisa is not with ma'ois, but rather with Meshicha. Karadich Sev, what's the pasuk that says V'kichach Misai Bibikot and Ebisumas Yara because Lashik is Amisai? From the Etz pasuk, we touch up the pasuk says the Gemara Tzumas Yah. What does it mean alone? This talks about a case in which he designated a kli to utilize as a fikata and as collateral for a loan. Ashak. What does the pasuk mean if you withheld wages? It means in which he designated a kli to use as collateral for not paying his wages. So the pasuk just speaks about a pikadon for alva, for paying a worker. The pasuk continues and teaches us, v'hayan it shall be ki yechatef, one sins v'asham, and he realizes he made a mistake. Veishav is like zelasher gazal, and he returns that which he stole. Oyesa oyshek asher ashak. Or he returns the wages that he withheld. Or the security asher hufkad oisai, that itai that was given to him. There's one item that after the pasuk repeats itself. The one item that is not repeated is tzumas yad. Is not the case of a loan. My timer. La mishom de mechosra meshicha. Proves the Gemara, you know why? Because there was no Meshicha. So clearly the way to effect a Kenyan on the Midaraisa, on the level of a Pasik, suggests the Gemara is with Meshicha. And because that was lacking, that's why it wasn't repeated. A beautiful raya to Reish Lakish. Amle Rababa le Rava. Ema me oishegud ader kra. Says Rababa to Rava, no. When the pasuk says that the returning of the loan, we can learn it from a case of the not paying back the worker, which it did say. So it didn't have to repeat it. You're telling me for the fact they didn't repeat the loan, therefore we can learn out this whole din because there's no kinyan deraisa. So must be the kinyan deraisa with the Meshicha. Says Rav Papa, slow down. Maybe we didn't repeat it because we can learn it out from Ishak. We can learn it from whole withholding wages. Says the Gemara, Hachamay Eskinan, Kon shenatloi mimenu v'chazrai v'efkidai etzloi. Says the Gemara, you know what we're talking about in the case of the pikadain, in the case of not paying the worker. We're talking about a case in which the worker took the mashkain and gave it back to him. Says the Gemara, it's the same case. What's going on if you're trey gamni pikadin? Yachisu nami. Lahadri look me. Chumas yad. Why don't we say the same thing? Lahadri look me. That he took it and he gave it back to him. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. A very fascinating answer. Enochanami, says the Gemara. If the pasuk would have been repeated, you're right. It wouldn't have been a kasha. It wouldn't have been a raya. But hashta deloya hadrei. But now that the pasuk did not repeat sumas yad kra, therefore Metziah lay. Therefore it's a raya to Reish Lakish. So interesting in the methodology of learning from the psukim, but the Gemara sort of agrees that it's not the greatest raya, because the fact if the pasuk would have said it, we wouldn't have learned anything. But the fact that the pasuk doesn't say it, therefore it's a raya to Reish Lakish. Says the Gemara, 1 second, assume is really not repeated. Vatani, we learned to the right summer of Shimon Ayin Litin as Amr Lamalamata Dechsev, which equates and puts the two psukim together. And on this, Amr Nachman Amr Rabu Amr Rav the Rabbi Shumas Yad Li Shavoin. So says the Gemara, from the fact that the two psukim are equated, it would seem it is repeated. Therefore, at some level, says the Gemara, the pasuk is a raya to Reish Lakish, that a kinyan midaraisa is done with Meshicha. Masnitan minolan. So says the Gemara, okay, but where's the raya from the Mishnah? The Tanya. We learned in a brayso, we're 15 lines to the bottom. The first line is the Tanya. Nasna levalon mo'al. If someone gave a coin that is hektish to the bathhouse. He pays for his bath with a coin. Ma'al, it's considered misusing properties of Vaktish even before he goes into the bath. V'amar Rav, and Rav explains, Davka Balanu, to Lemechasi Mashicha. Only by the Balanit, only by the bathhouse attendants, that there's no Mashicha lacking. Avomidi Achriti, if you would have utilized the coin for something else, the Mechazir Mashicha, Loimal Ad Mashich, there would not be Me'ilah until he does a Mashicha on the item. So suggests the Gemara, we see clearly in this brisa, Mashicha is integral in this Mishnah. Ask the Gemara, Vatanya Nasla Sabar Mal, Vesaba Boilim Memshach, this virus. Ask the Gemara, almost a technical kasha. You just told me you don't have to do Mashicha because a bathhouse is an entity of such that doesn't require a Mashicha. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But taking a haircut requires a Mashicha. He has to pick up the scissors. And yet we see that there's a Me'ilah. You're considered misusing the property of the Beis HaMikdash even prior to moving the scissors. Says the Gemara, talking about a guy that can't do a Mashicha. Tana Miyachi, says the Gemara, bring your raya, 5 lines from the bottom. If you give money that had Kedusha on it, that was Haktish, to a barber, a boatman, or any craftsman, Kasha now, these we have a straight up stira. Is a Mashicha necessary or not? Rather proves the Gemara, Lalav, what do we see clearly? 3 lines from the bottom. Shema mina kam besaber nochri, kam besaber Yisrael. Shema mina, a clear raya to Reish Lakish that there is a Mashicha, is the methodology to do a kinyan on the Daraisa level. And 2 lines at the bottom, after bringing a proof both from Pasuk and Braisa to Reish Lakish, says the Gemara, Rav Nachman said, like Rav Yochanan, the opposite, that the kinyan midaraisa is not with Mashicha, but rather with money. Ubadka Levi b'masnita v'ashkach, and he found that like Rav Nachman, like Rav Yochanan, that midaraisa money is a kinyan. Says the Mishnah, Nasna l'sitoin ma'al. Similar from the previous case, someone gives a coin that had Kedusha on it to a wholesaler. Then he is chayiv. Someone who sells and a bulk, someone who transfers a cheveni gadol, says Rashi. Umoichaber is harbe, he sells it to all the different stores. It's like a down payment of sorts for the entire shipment. So so we turn over to Memches Amid Beis. Ask the Gemara Lekasha L'Reish Lakish. So then this brisa that said if you give it to a sitain, there is Me'ilah, which thereby proves Rav Yochanan that what is a kinyan midaraisa with cash. Ask the Gemara, that's a kasha on Reish Lakish. Lekasha L'Reish Lakish, the top line of Memches Amid Beis. Amar L'cha Reish Lakish. Hamani Rav Shimoni, which if you remember the previous year, we had Rav Shimon, who Reish Lakish said he's only going with the Chachamim. So for Reish Lakish go, he's defend anything and say he's going with the opinion of Rav Shimon. Continues the Gemara, 2 lines down, Memches Amid Beis, continuing the discussion of our Mishnah, which is what happens if you pay cash and you don't follow through with the deal. We saw already, there's a Misha Bara, which we learned is a second level. The highest level is where you can't back out at all. The next level after money is given, or to use the terminology of the Gemara, Devarim and Ma'is. Then what's the din? Then there's this Misha Para. And then the next level down is what? Is when there is not only Ma'is, no Ma'is and only Dvarim. Then we said, Ein Ruach HaChamim, Noichei Menu, Chazal is not happy with you. So says the Gemara 3 lines down, quoting the Mishnah of Lamru Misha Bara v'chulu. Itmar Abaye Omar, teaches Abaye Oidia Moidina Lei. We tell him that if he reneges, he's going to be under this curse. And Rav Omar, no, Milat Laitina and Lei, we straight up curse him. Meaning, the Machlokes here being, what is our part of this? Do we just sit at the sidelines and let him know, by the way, If you back out, you're under the Misha Para, the curse of Chazal. Or, no, says Rava, we stand up and we give him the curse, Misha Para Mianchidara Mabul, who asin li para v'chulu, that's what Bezdin says to him. Explains the Gemara, Bayamar, 5 lines down, why Dichsiv says the Pasuk v'nasi b'amcha, loisa'or, the leader, the Nasi, should not curse, so we don't want to curse anyone. Rava Amar Milat Laitinan Lei, we curse him Dichsiv b'amcha, only Nasi b'amcha loisa'or, which is what? When one is performing actions of your people, acting in an appropriate manner, but if not, he gets the curse. So that's the machlekes Abaye and Rava. What is our attitude? Do we facilitate the Mishapara or not? Says Rava, Amar Rava Mna Minallah. From where do I know that there's indeed a curse? 10 lines down, Rav Bar Yosef Avle Zuze Amalcha. Rav Bar Yosef gave money for some salt, but they didn't end up taking the salt. So went up in value. You have to go pay. And if you don't give him the salt, if you don't give the salt, then you're accepting upon yourself this mishabara, this curse. So what do we see from here? It says Rava, if you're going to tell me that you merely let him know, does he need to be told? Of course, a Talmud Chacham like Rav Bar Yosef knows the halacha. Ve'elamai, says the Gemara Shkoyach. So you're going to tell me Me'elai Tinalei, the same kasha. Rav Bar Yosef asli kabulei alai latusa derabanan. Could it be did something that he's going to accept such a curse? Says the Gemara, doesn't make any sense. Ella rather explains the Gemara. Rav Bar Yosef, a Rav Anudi Avlei. Rav Bar Yosef gave an iravain, a down payment to Savar, Kenegda Yehukana, and Rav Bar Yosef held that if you give an iravain, if you give a down payment, then what? Only Kenegda Yehukana, opposite the value of the down payment, that there is a kinyan on. And that's where Rav Yochanan is letting him know. Keneged Kula Yehukana, that no, there's a kinyan opposite the whole thing, and therefore there is a mishabara on this case. The Gemara tried to bring a right from here, but as to the greatness of Rav Bar Yosef, not so simple to prove either way. Says the Gemara, Itmar, a Ravoin, Rav Amar, Kenegdu kind of Rav Yochanan Amar, Keneged Kula Yukaina, interjecting the Gemara that this din, whether the Ravoin, whether the down payment affects a kinyan on the whole item, or rather affects a kinyan only opposite the part that he paid, is indeed a machlaikas between Rav and Rav Yochanan. Meisvei asks the Gemara on the shita of Rav that says Kenegdo Kain. Again, we're in the middle of a sidebar segue. In the larger picture, we're discussing a machlaikas Abaye and Rava, whether Bezdin gives out the curse or lets him know he's going to be cursed. Within Rava trying to prove himself, Rava brought down the story of Bar Yosef, which from there we learned out that in the case of an Eravain, that you don't pay for the full item, you give a down payment. A machlaik is whether the curse is commensurate with that which you paid, or for the whole thing. So I asked the Gemara, according to Rav, that says Kenegdu Ukaina, the kinyan is only opposite that which you gave. Meisvei Hanoisin Eravon Chaveiroi V'Amar Loyim Ani Chazer Bi Eruvein Machul Lecha. If I back out the Eravain, the down payment, the security, I'm forfeiting to you now. Another guy says, if I back out, guess what? I'll give you double your Eravain. This Kaimu Atanayim, the stipulations that each one said are binding. Divrei Rabbi Yosi. So says the Gemara, where does Rabbi Yosi come from? Rabbi Yosi L'Taimei Damar Asmachta is Kanya. There is a kinyan on and a smachta. Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yosi that says in this case for Ravain. When I say if I don't pay you, you keep the Ravain. You said I'll double the Ravain. The stipulations are binding. Rabbi Yehuda, he argues is Dayo Shigna Keneged Eirvanai. It's enough that you acquire opposite the Ravain. So says the Gemara, Amar Rashbag, Bamed Var Mamorim, Bisman Shamar Le'Aruvain Yikoin. when he says my Ravoin should be acquired to you, if you sell something for 1,000 zuz and you give a down payment of zuz and you give 500 zuz, so suggests the Gemara, now that we have the whole brisa, my love, who I didn't limit metaltalin. It sounds like the same thing should be by metaltalin. Obedistama kanilule kulu. And the mistama is that you get the whole thing. Frak the Gemara, so to kasha on Rav. Because we see from this brisa that what is the stama? The stama is kaneluhu bekulu, that you acquire everything, and therefore if you back out on anything, it's considered that you get a misha para on the whole thing. Says the Gemara, loy, no raya, mitaltalin b'distama loy kani. Only by mitaltalin can you say that the stama is like kani. What's the difference? Ask the Gemara, mamish. In the case of karka, since there's a kinyan with money, kanile lekula. But metaltalin, says the Gemara, kani. Really, with cash, there's no kinyan. What's the kinyan that's affected with cash? Only kabule misha para. Therefore, loikana kule, there's not a kinyan on the whole thing. So you try to bring a raya to Rav, and the Gemara's raya falls short. So again, we're still in the middle of our segue. Our machloek is Rav and Rav Yochanan. What is the status of an eravin, of a down payment? How much of a kinyan does it affect? Within this segue, lema kitanoi. 10 lines from the bottom suggests the Gemara. Let's say that really the machlokes Rav and Rav Yochanan is a machlokes Tanoim. Hamal v'eschadir ala mashkoin, says the Brayso. Someone lends to someone else with a mashkoin. V'nichnesa shmita. Comes shmita. Aval pisheinu shava ela polag. Even though the mashkoin is only worth half of the loan, Einoi mishameit divrei Rashbag. The halacha, of course, is that Shemitah comes along and cancels all loans. Says Rav Shimon Gamliel, but if the security was half, then Einoi mishameit, the whole loan is not canceled. Rav Yudah Nasi, there are 4 lines from the bottom. Im haya mashkoin kineged alvasai. If the mashkin is worth as much as the whole alva, then Einoi mishameit, vim lav mishameit. So says the Gemara, what do we see? My Einoi mishameit deka'amar Rashbag. Rav Shimon Gamliel, he said, even though the mashkin is only worth half, Einoi mishameit. What do those words mean? And the Gemara, of course, now is really articulating and explaining what's obvious. If he meant opposite the amount of the halva, so comes off that Rav Yudah Nasi is going to hold that even that half is yes mishamit. But says the Gemara, if that is true, as we turn over to Metziah and Al, if you don't have the page in front of us, we'll just read a few more lines as we're in the middle of a sentence. Then what is there a point of a mashkin at all? The whole point of the mashkin is to repay the loan if need be. But then at least a portion of that loan, the portion connected the mashkin, should be unaffected. And if Rav Yudah holds it's not, then what's the whole point of the mashkin? Elolav shmamino, so what does he say? Ma'ina mishgamet to come Rashbag. What if Shimon Gamliel must hold? He must hold in a mishami bekulai. He must hold that the whole loan is not canceled. Or Ma'ina misham to come Rav Yudah Nasi. He holds that part. That's what the mashkin does. And this is our machlekes. Rashbag savar keneged kulai ukaine. Rashbag holds keneged kulai, which we'll say is like Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan holds like Rashbag, and Rav Yudah Nasi savar keneged ukaine, and Rav is going to hold like Rav Yudah Nasi. It says the Gemara, so isn't Rav and Rav Yochanan a machlekes Tanayim? Answers the Gemara again. I apologize for the top of Metziah and Aleph. Says the Gemara, loy, that is not the machlokes. My Einoi Mishame, we're 10 lines down, Memtesam and Alit to Kamer Ashbag, Lachbal Gudanakle Mashkin. Mechlad Rav Yudah Nasi Savar, so the problem is that seemingly holds Rav Yudah Nasi says, Lachbal Gudanakle Ale Mashkin, Nami Mishamit, Ela Mashkin Dinakil Amali. So according to Rav Yudah Nasi, what does the Mashkin help at all? Lezichra in the Devarim Ba'alma. You're right. It doesn't really help in any practical, pragmatic dollars and cents. But you know what it helps for? It helps as a reminder. It helps as a reminder that what? The guy can never say, there's no halva over here. What do you mean there's no halva? You have my mashkin. That's what it does, even though practically with Karta Shemitah will not help. We'll pick it up from here, B'siyata, De Shemaya, on the next Shir.